bringing together voices in child and youth healthcare. This is CAFC Presents.
CAFC would like to thank the following member organizations for their generous support of our knowledge translation activities: the IWK Health Centre, the Children's Health Foundation of London, the McMaster Children's Hospital Foundation, the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario Research Institute, the Children's Hospital Foundation of Manitoba, the Montreal Children's Hospital Foundation, and the Holland Bloorview Children's Rehabilitation Hospital Foundation. We would also like to thank the following Keystone partners for their ongoing contributions that support all of CAFC's programs and activities.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of CAFC Presents. My name's Doug Maynard, and I'm the Associate Director at CAFC, the Canadian Association of Pediatric Health Centres, and it's great to be back on track with our webinar series, just recently returning from the CAFC annual conference that we held in Quebec City, which was a fantastic success, and a real thanks to our colleagues in Quebec City who really hosted a fantastic conference, fantastic parties at the Quebec legislature, and all sorts of other great things that happened at that event, including the opportunity to put some faces to some of the voices that we hear on these webinars every week. So that was real great, but it's great to be back. So, and we have an excellent panel today to kick off our next round of webinars. But before, and I think this is really going to be a great session, just because of the great panel, but we brought social media to our conference and our webinar audience on a few different occasions. We had Ann Fuller and Susan Gregg from CHEO and BC Children's back 4 or 5 years ago at our annual conference, talking about some of the steps they were taking in more or less in dipping their toes into the social media waters back when it was fairly new for hospitals to be engaging in activities on social media. And that was really just about sharing experiences and stories of what they were doing or what might be possible. We had our colleagues from our CYCC network, the Children and Youth in Challenging Contexts, and their colleagues from Mind Your Mind, talking about engaging youth through technology that had a big component on using social media, and that was very interesting as well. But what's different now is that we've got a few years under our belt of various healthcare organizations using social media, so there's been an opportunity for our research community to have some time to study this area and to start to give us a better picture of how social media is being used, and not just how effective it might be, but also where it might be most effective. So it's a real pleasure to introduce our panel today, and I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. First off, we're going to hear from Dr. Christine Chambers. Christine is a clinical psychologist and professor in the departments of pediatrics and psychology and neuroscience, with cross appointments in anesthesia, pain management, and perioperative medicine and psychiatry. And she's also the former chair, or Canada Research Chair in Pain and Child Health at Dalhousie University in Halifax. And her lab is based at the Center for Pediatric Pain Research at the IWK Health Centre. And you may recognize Dr. Chambers' name associated with webinars that we did in the area of pediatric pain. And our colleagues from our CAFC's Community of Practice in Children's Pain also mentioned that she recently won the Jeffrey Lawson Award for Advocacy in Children's Pain Relief from the American Pain Society. So that's some fantastic news there, and thanks to our Community of Practice for bringing that to my attention. And joining Dr. Chambers, we have Dr. Michelle Dyson, who's an assistant professor at the Alberta Research Centre for Health Evidence in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Alberta. Her research is based on using knowledge translation to improve research in child health, and she's involved in the evaluation of various methods to engage with different stakeholder groups. And one stream of her research is focused on novel methods of connecting with patients and parents, including through the use of social media. So we do have some real experts on the panel today, and it's my pleasure to hand the virtual podium to start off with over to Dr. Chambers. Over to you.
Thanks, Doug, for the kind introduction and the opportunity to present alongside Michelle today about the work that we've both been doing in the area of social media and child health. And as the title of our webinar indicates, we're here to talk to you about some of our successes, but also some of the challenges that we've experienced in this new and sort of developing area. So Doug has already given us a very nice introduction, so this is just who we are here on this slide. And our plan for today is that I'm going to start by giving just kind of a general introduction to those of you who may have varying levels of familiarity with social media. Then I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to present on her her really fascinating research and her incredible systematic reviews, which I've really admired and have influenced my work. And then Michelle's going to turn it back to me to talk a little bit more about some of the different ways that we've been using social media to promote child health research as well as practice and advocacy. So also, as Doug mentioned, we are trying to multitask today. So not only are we on the webinar, but we're also going to be live tweeting the webinar using the hashtag CAFC and if you like, you can also tag CAFC or myself or Michelle, and we'll try to get a dialogue going both on the webinar, but also via Twitter, and try to work in some of the questions that are coming in over Twitter too. So as a bit of background, our topic today is social media. And as many of you are probably aware, the growth and use of social media has been tremendous. These are some estimates that we pulled a number of months ago now, and I'm sure that these estimates are even greater now. Millions and billions of people are engaged online. Facebook recently had a record login day of over 1 billion logins in a single day. And what's interesting about that is that we know that about 95% of those logins are people who are not actually posting content themselves or necessarily engaging with content. They are what we would call lurkers, people who are sort of observing and getting information over social media. This is a figure from a recently reported Pew Research survey report that was released just a few weeks ago, looking at social media usage among American adults over the last decade. And you can see a tenfold jump in social media use from 2005 to 2015. 65% of adults now use social media online. This is an American a survey. However, other studies have shown that Canadians are actually more engaged socially than many other countries. There is a big correlation with age in that younger people are more likely to be on social media, but actually the largest growing demographic of social media users is in individuals aged 65 and over. So we wanted to do a quick poll. We have 3 of these polls that we'll be using over the next while. So the first poll question is, which statement, and Doug is going to open this poll. Doug, is there any special instruction people need to participate?
Nope. For those of you who are familiar with these, you just go up and click your selection on the screen. So the question is, which statement best describes your familiarity with social media? The choices being, what is a Twitter? I have no idea. I have a social media account, but don't use it. Maybe a lurker, like Christine was just mentioning. I use social media once in a while. Or Instagram, Twitter, you name it, I'm on it. So which of those statements best describes you? Just go ahead and click on the screen to make your selection, and we'll get a sense of how social media savvy this audience is. And we can see that the majority, 51%, are in the I use social media once in a while. 43% are the Instagram, Twitter, you name it, I'm on it. And only 1% is what is a Twitter, only 5% is I have a social media account but don't use it. But a fairly savvy audience, I would say.
Oh, that's great. So it's nice to see that we've got a group of people who are really engaged on social media, but also maybe people who are using it just once in a while and maybe are keen to explore other ways that they could use it. So I have to say that I've really only been using social media professionally for the last 2 years or so. And when I first started doing work in this area, a lot of people would roll their eyes and think that it was silly or that it wasn't really something that you should be using for professional purposes. And I still encounter that, but things have changed a lot attitudinally about social media in the last year. This slide shows an article that was published in Nature last year on scientists and the social network. And there was also another high-profile piece in the journal Cell last year, providing an overview of scientists who are active on Twitter. So I think things have really started to shift, and there's greater value in both the academic and the health professional world about how Twitter and other forms of social media can be useful tools. This is a slide from, or a graph from the Nature paper in which they asked scholars who regularly visited social media sites what they were using the social media for. And as you can see from this slide, many said that they were using it to follow discussions, that they were posting work or content, discovering peers, or discovering recommended papers. But also lots of other ways that people are using social media professionally. The stigma around social media and the sort of misunderstandings of its use, especially in a professional construct, are still there. And I thought this was a really funny cartoon that really exemplified some of the myths that people have about social media. So this is a spoof on that Nature graph by PhD Comics that says why academics really use Twitter. Gives me something to do during boring seminars, procrastination, legitimize my web surfing. So there's still a lot of belief perhaps that social media isn't a credible tool. But we hope today to show you the various ways that social media can be used in effective ways, but also highlight some of the challenges as well. So we'll conclude this section with another audience poll. So I'll let Doug get that set up for you. And the question this time is, which statement best describes what you use social media for? Would you say it's either A, mostly personal use, so this could be, sharing photos, keeping up with your high school friends, or would it be B, mostly professional use? So maybe you're posting content or using social media in your area of interest or work. Or is it C, a mix of both?
And it looks like we're in two camps, either mostly personal or a mix of both, with only 9% saying mostly professional.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so I think, and this is something I think that's changing a lot for people, at least in my personal case. Up to 2 years ago, I was exclusively using social media for personal use. Now it's very much a mix of both, although there's some platforms that I'm using that are mostly professional. And we'll talk about some of the different types of social media that are available shortly as well. But for now, what I'm going to do is turn things over to Michelle to present on her work, and just remind you that in addition to taking part on the webinar, you can follow us using the hashtag. Michelle, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Christine. As has been mentioned, we're going to cover some of the research that's been going on behind the scenes on the use of social media in child health, and I'll touch on a few projects that ARCH has been leading over the past couple of years. So I'll try to cover two broad objectives in my part of the talk today. The first will be to provide an overview of what kind of research has been done on the use of social media in healthcare, particularly focusing on child health. And the second will be to describe some of the successes and challenges that we've faced in trying to use social media as a channel to disseminate child health evidence to healthcare professionals, and also as a stakeholder engagement strategy with parents. So this slide shows a bit of a framework of the different knowledge synthesis work that we've done in the area of social media. And what started out as kind of a general plan to conduct one review to map out how social media was being used in healthcare somehow morphed into 2 broad scoping reviews and 4 further systematic reviews where we identified pockets of research, including on the effectiveness of social media in modifying diet and exercise behaviors, how social media is used in child health, the impact of cyberbullying on children and youth, and how youth who self-harm use social media. So I'll give a bit of an overview of each of these reviews. When we started out, we wanted to get an overall sense of what kind of studies had been done and for what purposes. So we quickly found that there were large bodies of literature that were focused both on how patients and caregivers use social media and also on how healthcare professionals and trainees use social media. So we divided that original scoping review into 2. We wanted to keep it broad, and so our criteria for inclusion were basically any primary research that evaluated the use of social media in a healthcare setting. The definition of social media that we used was that it had to be an online tool and incorporate user-generated content, but we excluded mobile health, so things like apps, podcasts, real-time conversations mediated by technology, so things like Skype. And this was actually one of the early challenges that we found, was that there isn't a good consistent definition of what social media even is. And with such a rapid evolution of technology, it's really quite difficult to create that definition that's all-encompassing. So we were finding that we had to define the parameters of our definition and operationalize that as we were working through our review. So the first scoping that we did was looking at the use of social media by healthcare professionals and trainees. And we identified 96 studies here. The largest proportion evaluated a discussion forum, and this was often in a classroom setting. And it definitely spanned disciplines, so it was quite prevalent, whether it was medical, nursing, allied health, education. Other categories for uses of social media included for practice, and these studies tended to evaluate tools like blogs, where clinicians could communicate with their peers. And the general purpose category listed there mainly included studies that aimed to determine professionals' perceptions of social media. And something that was interesting in this group of studies was how social media was used. So not surprisingly, the main use was for communication, but social media has also shown a lot of potential in different applications, such as the use of wikis to promote collaborative learning, or things like virtual worlds where trainees can practice their clinical skills. On the patient side, we identified 284 relevant studies, and again, the most common type of social media tool evaluated was a discussion board, this time making up a full 2/3 of our sample. We had clusters of studies in clinical areas like lifestyle and weight loss and cancer, but there was quite a broad range of topics covered. In 77% of our studies, the social media was intended to facilitate self-care, so for example, things like providing support. Other categories included the facilitation of health literacy, to guide clinical decision-making, and also to promote patient safety. So almost half of the studies in our sample were descriptive, although we did have a few RCTs that evaluated effectiveness. So this just gives a really brief look at these two reviews, but one of the key lessons we learned from this was a greater appreciation for the adaptability of social media. We're seeing this more and more with the development of new social media platforms, and as people develop new ways to use existing platforms. But for something that started out as a way for friends to communicate, social media has really expanded its scope, that it is possible to apply it in the classroom, or to keep up to date on news from your profession, or to try out new skills. So there really are, an amazing array of applications here. With all of the potential, though, it's sometimes easy to get a bit caught up in the excitement. So one thing that we looked at in the RCTs, in the patients and caregivers review, was the comparison between the conclusions that the authors were presenting in these primary studies, whether they were positive or negative, and the statistical significance of their findings. So while 73% of the studies presented positive conclusions related to the effects of social media, less than half of those actually had statistically significant results. So we also found a few challenges in studying social media. As I mentioned before, there isn't a consistent definition, which had implications for our search and on selecting relevant studies. This is also an area where there's new evidence daily, so it is quite difficult to keep pace. And we're also a bit limited in how generalizable our findings can be. There's inevitably a time lag between when a social media tool is launched or becomes popular and when there's actually research on it. And the research doesn't necessarily match with how social media is being used in real life. So we did have quite a few studies that evaluated platforms that are now obsolete, and we had a very high proportion of discussion forums. So this doesn't necessarily provide an accurate depiction of where the patients are, but it does show us what has been studied and perhaps where it would make sense to focus more of our research efforts. So what we did was we used our scoping reviews to outline where the evidence already existed, and we did identify a few key areas where there would be an opportunity to conduct a systematic review. So a couple of summers ago, we had a summer student who conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis of 22 RCTs that evaluated the effectiveness of social media in modifying diet and exercise behaviors. Most of these studies were conducted in adults, but 6 were focused specifically on children and youth. In most cases, the interventions were set up as complex interventions with a social media component, which was usually a discussion board. We didn't find a significant difference for any of the primary outcomes, although a few outcomes like physical activity and dietary fat consumption showed some improvement. So the challenges that emerged from this review were that attrition rates were really quite high across all studies, and they did tend to consist of very homogeneous populations, and in this case it was middle-class Caucasian women. Another challenge is that studying social media as one component of a complex intervention makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to tease out the effect that it might be having compared with the other components of that intervention. Our next review looks specifically at how social media was being used in child health and whether we could identify factors associated with effectiveness. We included 25 studies, most of which targeted adolescents and used discussion forums for health promotion. Looking at the clinical conditions for which social media was being used, we found that the studies in acute conditions tended to look at the use of these tools to keep parents informed. In chronic conditions, social media was used as a means of support for the pediatric patient, the family, or both. And for health promotion, social media efforts were targeted directly to adolescents, commonly on more sensitive topics like sexual health or smoking cessation. So our data here was too heterogeneous to pool for any quantitative measure of effectiveness, but we did include cross-sectional, qualitative, and mixed method studies, so we tried to use those studies to glean that same kind of information. So the themes that emerged here were that users really valued the wealth of information that could be provided via social media channels, and that hitting the right balance between providing informational and emotional support was critical. We also identified an interesting difference in factors that were perceived to be beneficial across different age groups. So among the younger children, social media seemed to work best as a distraction, while in older children, youth, and caregivers, the sense of community that social media could provide was highly valued. So none of the studies that evaluated social media as a means to change health outcomes found a significant effect. However, there was a fairly substantive focus on health promotion, where there could be potential for impact. Given that this is where a lot of the current research efforts are being made, to see more positive effects in the future, it will likely be important to find the tools that the target audience is already using and meet them there, rather than trying to bring them into platforms like discussion boards that are often just created for the purpose of the study. So from our scoping review, we also identified a few pockets of studies that evaluated the potential harms of social media for children and youth, and one of these topics was cyberbullying. We found 36 studies that measured the impact of cyberbullying in some way. Across these studies, the median self-reported prevalence was 23%, so it is a fairly substantial issue. We pulled out some of the details to form a bit of a profile of who cyberbullying affects and how, and found that relationships tended to be at the root of many instances, and that girls tended to be more likely to be bullied online than boys. We included 10 studies that measured the association between cyberbullying and depression, and there was a consistently significant relationship between exposure to cyberbullying and depression. A caveat here is that of the studies we included in the review, all were cross-sectional except for one, but that one study was a longitudinal evaluation of this relationship between exposure to cyberbullying and depression, and it did find that exposure increases the likelihood of depression over time. We also included 5 studies each that evaluated the relationship between cyberbullying and anxiety or self-harm, but the evidence here was inconsistent. We were able to extract some data on some of the coping strategies that children and youth use when they're being cyberbullying, and there was a very strong tendency to try to deal with it passively. So it seemed like they were unlikely to tell anyone, especially an adult, when it happens, and more often just tried to ignore it. So something interesting here was that one of the big reasons for not wanting to tell parents about cyberbullying was that these children and youth didn't want their computer privileges to be taken away, and along with it a big part of their social life. So I think here it's really important to emphasize the importance of safe internet use rather than limiting internet use, which may help to open up that dialogue between parents and their children. So we have created a couple of infographics with some of the key messages from this review. One is more targeted for a lay audience and one more for healthcare providers. So we have these available on the ARCH website, so feel free to check those out and share with your network. The last review that I'll talk about is one on how youth who self-harm use social media. So here we included 26 studies. The majority of the study population was a bit older, between 19 and 21 years. They're most often female, and just under 20% had a documented history of depression. There was an interesting split between the benefits of social media in the population and the harms. The harms do tend to get the most attention, and they certainly do exist. So some of the most common themes here were that online communities can normalize and accept self-harming behavior. They can facilitate the discussion of motivation, triggers, methods of concealment, and suicidal ideation or plans, and in some cases can even show live depictions of acts of self-harm. However, it's also important to recognize that there can be benefits. So this is a highly stigmatized community, and these platforms can provide support and a sense of community that these individuals really might not feel or be comfortable seeking elsewhere. So we did learn a lot from this series of reviews. Some of our key lessons were that really there's lots of interest around the use of social media. There's a huge literature base. To date, though, it has been largely descriptive. Most studies are evaluating discussion boards, and it is hard to keep up with what the popular tools are. A lot of these studies look at social media as a part of a complex intervention, making it tough to distinguish what the impact that can be attributed directly to social media is. And while there are both benefits and harms for children and youth associated with the use of social media. So I think moving forward, we can really put out a challenge for new research in the area. As people are becoming more familiar with social media and with what it can do, we can start to conduct more prospective comparative studies to see how effective social media really can be. And it's really a great time to get some really good research out there. So I'm just going to shift gears a little bit to talk about two studies that we've undertaken to see how we can use social media as a tool. In this first one that I'll talk about, we were trying to use social media to disseminate child health evidence to healthcare providers in child health. So it is well known that providers want access to highly synthesized and reliable information to support that point of care decision making. And within ARCH, one of the initiatives that we're closely tied to is the Cochrane Child Health Field, whose mandate is to disseminate high-quality healthcare evidence in child health. We are also involved with a journal called Evidence-Based Child Health, and with ARCH, we're highly involved in the production of knowledge syntheses. So one of our goals is to get that evidence out there. So the combination of all of these initiatives kind of presented a really good opportunity to start out a social media strategy and conduct a formal evaluation of how that could be launched and how we could develop a presence in knowledge mobilization. So our strategy here, this was all launched through the child health field, and our presence involved we had a Twitter account where we would have 3 tweets a day of promoting high-quality knowledge synthesis. We would write a blog that was posted every week, which involved a concise summary of one of these systematic reviews. So the study period was 22 weeks. And we also hosted monthly tweet chats where we would hold journal club discussions on one of these reviews over Twitter. So some of the metrics here were, with our Twitter account, over this 22-week period, we gained 469 followers. We had almost 1,200 retweets and 215,829 total impressions, which is the number of people who saw those tweets. With the blog, we had almost 4,000 views by about 2,500 unique visitors. And we found that our audience was mainly from Canada and the UK. Partly this could be because of the time zones, although we did kind of adapt once we saw where our audience was coming from. And likely due to the presence of Cochrane and kind of its influence in Canada and the UK. In terms of impact, we created 183 links to Cochrane content, so whether that was the full systematic review or a lay summary. And these received about 3,400 clicks. We also tracked altmetric scores of these promoted articles, and altmetrics are a way to measure kind of the impact that social media is having on that article, so the reach and kind of the quality of the spread of that message. So the average increase in score for these articles was 216%, but this number does cover up a lot of variability. Some of the articles that we were promoting they tended to be older, or they just hadn't received social media attention in the past. So, starting from zero, it was easier to see that big jump in reach. However, we definitely did see an increase for all of the articles that we promoted. So this big success here was that we did see an increased visibility of Cochrane evidence. It increased attention for the articles and generated more of a following for the child health field. In terms of challenges, we did find that it was very resource intensive. It takes a lot of time and also know-how of how to kind of create that presence and have to engage that audience. Another thing was the engagement in journal clubs. We couldn't really tell what the audience was like, just due to the fact that there are those lurkers. So we did have some people participating, and we did include a survey at the end to see if we could get feedback and get a sense of who was participating in these journal clubs. But that number was limited, so we just don't have the data to show who was participating in these. And we're also unable to measure the direct impact of the strategy, but we do have proxy measures. The second study I'll talk about is how we use social media for stakeholder engagement. And so this study was done in the context of kind of an increased focus on research becoming more patient-centered and wanting to engage the patients or the families. However, the best methods of engagement are unknown. So we were wondering whether social media could be used as kind of a novel, efficient method. We know that they're popular in the general population, and it could have the potential for broad dissemination to a diverse and representative sample. So we undertook the OUCH study, which stands for Outcomes in Child Health. Our question here was how effective social media was as a strategy to engage with parents in determining patient-centered outcomes. And we had two objectives. So the first was more to evaluate the process of using social media, using pediatric acute respiratory infections to establish proof of principle, and then also to examine the breadth and representativeness of the population engaged. So the context for our study was to conduct a survey of parents whose child had had an acute respiratory infection to determine which outcomes mattered most to them. We kind of had a three-pronged approach. Our online presence had three components. We had the study website, which we used to host more of the in-depth information about the study. We had a Facebook page, which we used to post information and links that were relevant to pediatric respiratory infections. And then we used our Twitter account to promote the study and to try to drive traffic to the survey. We tried to use we did use a snowball sampling approach. So initially we targeted a few key organizations with an interest in this clinical area or patient engagement to see if we could kind of build from there. So we engaged TREC, which is Translating Emergency Knowledge for Kids, and it's a network of emergency medicine. The Cochrane Consumer Network, which involves consumers in systematic reviews. The Alberta Centre for Child, Family and Community Research, the Stollery Family Centered Care Network, and Mommy Connections, which is an online parenting community. We also included a paid advertising strategy for part of our study period to see if that would have an impact on recruitment as well. So we found that most of our surveys were completed in the first month, and most of our survey respondents were highly educated, urban dwelling, and female. We found that Facebook and friends were the most common sources of referral to the survey, and while we did put a fair amount into our advertising strategy, but we found that there was a very low return on investment. I think in a month we only received 7 additional surveys. So we didn't find that social media resulted in a broad reach as a stakeholder engagement strategy, but there are a couple of factors that could feed into this. We were looking at an acute condition, so it was probably more difficult to find that existing community of parents that would have sort of an active participation in the area. Yeah, it was a little bit difficult to gain buy-in from the community, so that might be different looking at a chronic condition. But in terms of future research, we are wanting to evaluate the outcomes identified through our strategy to see how that stacks up to outcomes identified through other methods. And we're in the process of initiating a qualitative follow-up, which we are planning to host on Facebook and try to get a bit of a discussion going with parents there. So I think that there is value of social media and stakeholder engagement. This could be relevant in topic identification, prioritization. It could help with the interpretation of results and also has applications in knowledge translation. But I think that, it is a work in process, so we need to identify the most thoughtful ways that we can roll out these kinds of strategies. So with that, I will turn it back to Christine.
On with Dr. Chambers. Just my chance to remind the audience, if you do have any questions, go ahead and type those into the question box, and once we finish with the rest of Dr. Chambers' presentation, we'll start the discussion online here.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Michelle, for a really impressive overview of your research and your work on social media. So I'm going to take it the next step and provide some different examples and sort of more illustrative examples of how we've been using social media. So as a bit of background, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've been studying children's pain for 20 years now. I'm based in the Center for Pediatric Pain Research in Halifax at the IWK Health Center. And I'll show you oops, there we go. This is a copy of the first paper that I published in Children's Pain in 1996, so just under 20 years ago. And for many of us doing health research, the reason that we got into the field was to help make a difference in children's and families' lives. And certainly by publishing research articles, I thought that I was doing that. But increasingly, we're learning that it can take a very long time for health research to actually make its way into improvements in clinical practice. There are estimates that it can take as many as 17 years for research discoveries and findings to find their way into clinical care improvements. It's a leaky pipeline, so not all health research ever does find its way into changing or improving care. And there are many, estimates out there to show that many published research articles never get read or cited. And so this is a problem for me as a health researcher. And as a mom myself, I have 4 young kids. I, appreciate how social media is becoming a place where moms are going for information. This is a poll from Baby Center from a couple of years ago that showed that 91% of the moms that they surveyed were using social media on their phone. More than half were using their phone to take or share photos. Many were searching for parenting advice. And our mobile devices and our tablets have become, critical extensions of our lives and how we seek information. What social media platforms are moms going to? Well, primarily Facebook is the most popular forum or platform, and you can see YouTube follows just behind. Twitter is not very commonly used by parents. It tends to be used more by other organizations and healthcare providers and academics. Interestingly, some of the social media platforms like Instagram are growing in popularity, especially among younger parents. There was another Pew Research Center survey done this summer looking specifically at social media as a source of parenting advice and information. And what they found that they found that it's not just mothers, but fathers as well, who are increasingly looking for parenting information or finding parenting information while on social media, that they're using social media to receive emotional support on a parenting issue, or they're directly asking parenting questions. But if you look at what kinds of information is actually available online and over social media, there just isn't very much evidence-based information or evidence-based content. We as health researchers generally and health professionals generally aren't putting evidence-based content where parents are going. So 2 years ago, and actually I put the little happy second birthday balloon there because it's 2 years ago today that we launched a 2-minute YouTube video for parents. What we did in this YouTube video was we distilled evidence-based messages, so primarily use of distraction, relaxation, and topical anesthetic creams for needle pain management in children, and we did it in a different way. What we did was, instead of creating another boring 30-minute long video with a health researcher sharing information, what we did was have a little girl tell the story in a fun and engaging way. So this video is available on YouTube, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the evaluation of the video in a moment. One of the things I learned, though, that is very challenging, and this resonates a little bit from Michelle's presentation, is that just because you make content available online doesn't mean that parents will find it. It's not a matter of if you build it, they will come. We put all of our grant money and all of our resources and energy into producing the video and didn't really have a dissemination plan. And because I'm a researcher in a relatively low resource, environment, we decided to use social media, which is generally free, as a way to promote the video. So we've developed more of a social media presence around our Facebook page for the Center for Pediatric Pain Research. And I also started actively using Twitter as a tool for dissemination. I had never used Twitter before, even personally, and it wasn't until we had the video that we wanted to share that I started using Twitter. What you can see here on this slide is some of the very first tweets that I sent about the video. I targeted influencers like Andre Picard from the Globe and Mail, who is very supportive of vaccination and pain management, and he shared the video with his audience. He has a well-established and engaged social media following. We also targeted different online parenting media like Today's Parent, Parents Canada, and also here is a tweet that I sent the YummyMummyClub.ca. Yummy Mummy Club is an online forum for mothers run by Erica M., who, if you grew up in the 80s like me, you might remember her from her days on Much Music. But over the last 10 years has transitioned her communications expertise into creating a very progressive online community, networking mother bloggers and mother influencers across the country, and using very sophisticated and cutting-edge social media methods to reach parents. And you can see here from this tweet exchange that I tweeted at her, she wrote me back, and about the video said she liked it and was flagging her physician blogger to consider integrating it into a blog, which did appear, and I'll show you in a moment. You can also see great engagement from other partners and colleagues from across Canada and the world in information sharing. This is a tweet that Today's Parent sent out about our video that reached over 500,000 of their Twitter followers. So in terms of where we're at 2 years later with our YouTube video, we have had over 150,000 views of the video in over 150 different countries. You can see from the geographic pie chart here that most of our views have been in Canada and the United States. The video is English language, although we do have it subtitled in a number of different languages now. We also surveyed parents and health professionals after they viewed the video to get a sense of how much they liked the video, how helpful it was to them, and what impact it might have on their pain management practices. And as you can see from this chart, the ratings of how much they liked it, how helpful they thought it was, and how it had influenced their plans and their confidence around pain management in the future. All of these ratings were generally very high. We were also very pleased to see that there were significant increases reported by both parents and health professionals in terms of how much they plan to use each of the evidence-based strategies that were recommended in the video. You could see for parents, after watching the video, the number of parents planning to use deep breathing grew from 13 to 55%. For distraction, you can see that health professionals and parents were already doing a lot of distraction, but there were still significant increases in the amount of distraction to be used. And for topical anesthetic creams as well, in particular for parents, an increase from 18 to 63%. I'm showing you now the blog that appeared on the YummyMummyClub.ca forum about our video. And why I'm showing this to you is because it took an incredible amount of work to disseminate the video. I showed you just two of the hundreds and thousands of examples of tweets and Facebook posts that we have sent about this over the last 2 years. But whenever we were able to engage an influencer or have our content shared by someone who had a large following, we noticed a dramatic increase in the number of video views, including after this blog was published. And so that led us to wonder if we could establish a partnership with a partner who already has this extended reach and also has expertise in how to make content interesting, engaging to parents. We as researchers and health professionals do our best, but we're not in the business of knowing how to market material to parents and knowing what will engage and interest parents. And this slide shows you the extended reach of YMC, the YummyMummyClub.ca, via their website, their newsletter, and social media, which across various platforms actually reaches more than 5 million people a month, which for me as a researcher is an incredible audience, and I could spend the whole rest of my career tweeting and never be able to reach that many people on my own. So because of this, I reached out to Erica M. and about writing a grant together, which we submitted to the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And she actually is a co-principal investigator on the grant as a knowledge user. And together we developed a plan to disseminate evidence-based information about children's pain to her community using established methods that she uses on her forum. So blog posts, Twitter chats, videos, Facebook polls. And we were delighted that this grant was funded back in March and spent the summer developing this initiative. And we have a number of partners and supporters of this work, and we're very grateful to count CAFC as one of them. So we did launch this CIHR-funded initiative on September 21st in Halifax with a live event, but also a live tweeting component as well. And we were just blown away by the engagement around the live tweeting around the event. We had over 1,000 different tweets and ended up reaching 6 million people via that online component. And our hashtag, It Doesn't Have to Hurt, was the 3rd trending hashtag in Canada that evening. So as someone who has spent 20 years trying to get people to talk about children's pain, it was very exciting to see that happen. We have a video about our initiative, which you can visit at this link, and it is being considered as part of a CIHR contest using YouTube videos. And I'd actually encourage you, those of you who are interested in social media or potentially are interested in developing a YouTube video, to go to the CIHR YouTube channel and check out all the videos that are under consideration. There's over a dozen of them. They're all in the area of children's health, and give you a nice sampling of the different ways that different types of health researchers in different areas and different health professionals are using YouTube as a social media sharing method for health research and health information. These are just two examples of the blogs that we've been disseminating through YMC. The first one went live on September 21st and was written by me as an introduction to the initiative. Why aren't kids getting proper help for their pain? The second blog went live on October 13th with evidence-based strategies on how to help kids cope with stomach aches and headaches. Another blog is coming out in November on vaccination pain management. And so we have different themes in children's pain evidence that we're tackling every month. Another way that we're information sharing is using Instagram images. These are the two images that YMC has produced based on our evidence so far. One on the use of distraction for needle pain, another on yoga and relaxation for helping with recurrent pains. And we have many more of these planned. The next one that will be coming out is on breastfeeding as a strategy to reduce pain. We were in Toronto last week filming our first video, which is going to be about newborn pain. And again, all the content on YMC is mothers telling their stories and embedding evidence-based content. So we have a mother who had a premature baby who will be sharing her story of what she learned about pain management for her baby, embedding evidence-based themes. We'll also be having Twitter chats. Our first one is scheduled for January, where parents can come online and ask questions and interact with researchers and health professionals who are experts in children's pain. So I won't tell you too much more about the reach and the impact of this work because I'm coming back in January with Erica on another webinar to present our interim results. But I do want to mention that, in addition to doing this as a knowledge dissemination tool, we are very intensively studying this campaign. It's easy to pull, analytics to show the impact and the reach, from different types of social media, metrics. But it's another thing to show that it actually changes care and improves practices. And so as part of this initiative, we have an online survey for parents that we rolled out the 2 weeks leading up to the launch. And then we also did focused telephone interviews with parents around their pain management practices. So this was to establish a baseline to find out, what are parents generally doing now. And then a year from now, when the initiative is complete, we'll be revisiting those surveys and telephone interviews. To give you an idea of how powerful this kind of partnership can be, not only for creating great content that's fun and interesting, but also for pushing it out to a whole other different audience. We enlisted the help of YMC to do these surveys. And, we as researchers often struggle to get research participants to participate in our studies on our own. But with and we were only physically able to interview 200 of them before we launched the initiative. So I think these types of partnerships, can be powerful not just for knowledge mobilization, but also for completing research in a much more efficient way. To give you an idea of other ways that I've been using social media in my work as a professional, I wanted to share some examples. So one thing that I often do is tweet about newly published articles. These aren't just articles that my team or my colleagues publish, but just articles that I find very interesting and important. This is a tweet that I sent on a Sunday night last year, just over a year ago, about a study that was published actually by a group in Edmonton that showed that pain management in Canadian pediatric emergency departments was substandard. So I sent out this tweet, and then Andre Picard from the Globe and Mail, the health reporter, reached out to me and said, could you send me the paper? Could we talk tomorrow? And 2 days later, this very powerful article by Andre appeared in the Globe and Mail, talking about children's pain management and why it still gets short shrift. So again, it might seem like just a little tweet, but it has the potential to lead to something that can have a greater impact. There's growing research evidence on the impact of tweeting about newly published papers in terms of citations and downloads of research articles. And so increasingly journals and journal publishers are paying a lot of attention to this and creating social media strategies around dissemination of science. And of course, in my world as a health researcher, sadly it's not always, the number of people that your work impacts or the number of times your video has been viewed. It's the number of times that your paper gets cited that is a really important parameter. And so this is a way to improve both of those. Tweeting can improve uptake of science in many different ways. As just one example of a paper that we, as part of a social media working group for the journal Pain promoted, this is a brief paper on the facial expression of pain in children, adults, and animals that I co-authored with a neuroscientist at McGill. And this paper came out in April. And because it has a cool kind of pictured component to go along with it, it lends itself really well to sharing over social media. And so the paper was published. I sent out this one tweet about the paper, which had incredible uptake and ended up getting retweeted and shared internationally. And within 2 weeks of my tweet about this paper, our paper became the #2 most downloaded paper at the journal for the year. Do I think it's because it was the second best paper of the year? No. It simply had to do with the fact that we disseminated it in a very powerful way. There are other ways that you as health professionals and researchers and whatever other roles you are in can participate over social media. Twitter chats and Twitter parties happen when a group of people all tweet about the same topic at the same time using a specific hashtag. And I've had the pleasure of taking part in a number of these over the last year or so. This is a snippet from a Twitter chat that the Evidence-Based Nursing Journal organized on why aren't clinical guidelines being used in practice. And really the kind of tweeting that's happening right now about this webinar is just another example of how live tweeting or gathering together around a hashtag can promote interest and information share and expose you to different people who you wouldn't necessarily interact with in any other way. This is an article, and I think it's really important that those of us on social media continue to use traditional dissemination methods to share and sort of cross-fertilize. So Alison Twycross and I, who participated in that Evidence-Based Nursing Journal chat, wrote a newsletter piece for this Pediatric Pain Letter Journal about our experiences. Because I think the problem with social media often is that it's a community that's pretty insulated. It's very well networked, but only to people who are on social media. And I think what's great about this webinar and other educational opportunities is that we are exposing different audiences to the value. I also think it's important to let people know that we're not trying to necessarily convert you all to social media users. I think that it certainly can be very time-consuming, and I think what I generally recommend to people is that you appreciate the power that is here and also familiarize and get to know the people in your worlds who are active on social media. So if you're in a children's hospital, I can guarantee you that there is a social media person in your communications department who is charged with making Facebook posts and tweeting about your organization. And social media requires a lot of content to share. And so individuals who are active on social media are always looking for good content. So if you have important messages about children's health, the work you're doing, you're trying to recruit for a research study, you have a newly published paper, a new clinic or service is opening, make sure you know who your social media contacts are in your hospital, in your university, in your organization, and work with them to get that information shared. These groups often have well-established followings, tens of thousands of people. It would take you a whole lifetime to be able to amass that kind of following over social media. So I think we can be clever. There are certainly challenges, and I think, strategically considering how to use our resources in a way that's effective and efficient. And I think CAFC is doing a tremendous job over social media and pulling people in to their organization that way. And it really is just another layer of how you can interact and develop relationships with people. So I just wanted to, at the end of my little piece, before we open it up for discussion, acknowledge the research team and all of the funding agencies who have supported our work. And we also wanted to check in with you guys now with another audience poll, and then we're very keen to take your questions. So our audience poll question now is, which of the following statements best describes how you now feel about social media use in child health? So A, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. B, I think I might sign up. C, I'll try one new thing, maybe a Twitter chat. Or watch out, social media world, here I come.
Well, after that presentation, how could anyone say anything other than watch out, social media world, here I come? I mean, the number of tweets on Twitter talking about the power of the single tweet, as you demonstrated in your presentation. I mean, it was really quite incredible. But we'll give everyone a couple more seconds to put their answer choice in, and we'll see where everyone's at after that presentation. And then, as Christine mentioned, do start please typing your questions in, as we'd love to hear from you, your thoughts on what you've heard, and anything that we might have missed. What opportunities are there out there that you're taking advantage of to use social media in your area of practice that maybe may not have been mentioned in these two presentations? All right, so we'll turn that around, and it looks like the majority are certainly motivated. 43% saying I'll try one new thing, maybe a Twitter chat. 47% saying look out, social media world, here I come. And nobody's saying it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, so that's good.
I think the fact that we had so much interest in the webinar and that people were keen to kind of check it out shows that there's some openness here, which is wonderful.
All right. So we do have a few questions coming in. The first question, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but I think it's pronounced Noemi. She's asking, as she's a researcher, she's saying, do you have any experience in using tweets or posts on social media to guide research priorities? She says, what is your take on how one should proceed with ethics to do this? Some say, since it's available to all, we can use this for research, but her researcher hat says no, since we may use this for publication or research studies or other.
Right. Well, Michelle, do you want me to start with that one and then you can chime in?
Sure, sounds great.
Yeah. So in terms of using social media as a way to set research priorities, yes, I think it can be a very useful tool, and it can be done in two ways. I mean, I think the latter part of your question there makes me wonder if you're talking about kind of mining what's available on social media to try to get a sense of what people are interested in. So I'll talk about that in a second. But I think social media can be used very effectively to get especially patient input on research priorities. So a piece of the It Doesn't Have to Hurt initiative that we have ongoing is a very significant patient engagement piece. It's a very valuable component of the work where we have a parent panel who are engaged in advising us at every step along the way, what topics they want to learn about, what would lend itself best to videos and so on, as well as piloting all of our research procedures. And how I basically met almost every member of the parent panel was over Twitter. And so the whole group is sort of a social media group. And so in that way, we have a very feasible patient engagement strategy that is helping us in our project define our research priorities. The latter part of your question, though, makes me wonder if you're asking more about just kind of data mining. And actually, we are right now running a study or getting a study up and running by a PhD student of mine, in which we are looking at what kind of content is available online about children's pain as well as children's sleep. And for that project, we did apply for ethics approval. Even though, in theory, all the information is available, publicly available, because we do plan to publish the results, we wanted to get ethical approval for that. So I would advise that you check with your research ethics board around what they would recommend. It's a rapidly developing new area, and there's simply not a lot of guidelines around ethical issues of using social media content in research. Michelle, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. So actually both parts. For the research priorities, that's what we're trying to do with the OUCH project. We'd really like to get parent involvement in guiding what the most important outcomes to study are. And so we're hoping to be able to use Facebook as that platform where we can really draw people in and just engage them in that discussion, since it contributes so much to our research agenda. In terms of the ethics, I agree completely with Christine. I think that it is so new and there's not a lot of guidance. And so in my experience, we have erred on the side of caution. We've submitted everything through ethics. They haven't always known what to do with it. And so we've found that they've had a lot of questions. There haven't been barriers, but they just want to make sure that we're covering all the bases. And so, again, I would also recommend checking in with your ethics board to see what their requirements would be.
All right, thanks for that answer. And if you, as Christine mentioned, we weren't exactly sure if you were referring to something more specific, but if you do have a follow-up, if we're not quite answering your question correctly, please don't hesitate to type in a follow-up or a clarification into the question box, and I'll try and bring that to our presenters as well. The next question came in from Natalie, and this is an interesting question. She's talking about what are the rules and regulations like when trying to start up a social media outlet within a workspace. So, for example, within a hospital. She's talking specifically about Queen Elizabeth II Hospital, which I think is in Halifax. She's saying currently they're firewalled from Facebook, Twitter, etc., which, I hear that continuously, that people are firewalled not just from social media, but sometimes from even seeing webinars from other sources of information. And we keep talking about the need for knowledge translation and for healthcare practitioners to keep up, and at the same time, some of their facilities or employers are setting up barriers for them accessing these kinds of informations that you promote. And it's sort of surprising to continue to hear that this is still an issue, but we know that it still is. So what are your thoughts on as far as how do people go about setting this up when they are facing those kinds of restrictions?
Yeah, so I don't know how it is for you, Michelle, where you are, but I'm in a children's hospital where social media, some social media is blocked. So Facebook, for example, although Twitter is not. And I think that, I had to apply for a special exemption to get Facebook on my computer because I'm using it in research. So I think, our institutional policies and organization guidelines and infrastructure don't keep pace with the times. And I imagine over the next few years, those blocks are going to have to be removed. I mean, as Doug said, these are not just personal. I mean, the reason they get blocked is because people assume you're just, chatting with your high school friends on Facebook and not working. And I think that clearly that's not the case anymore, that there is a real legitimate professional use for these tools. In terms of policies, it's, again, there are very few organizations that have particular policies around your social media use. I would direct any of you who are interested to the Mayo Clinic. They have, if you just Google their social media policy at Mayo, Mayo is very progressive in their use of social media, and they have what I think is the best policy, which provides some explicit recommendations, but also gives some flexibility as well. I would be worried that we would over-regulate, social media use, but also, appreciate that we are, when we're on social media, representing our organizations to some capacity. So there needs to be some, careful guidelines there. I do really think, and I was just on a panel 2 weeks ago about, professionalism and use of social media. I think in the past people used to think there was a big divide between their personal life and their professional life. And I think what has happened, partly because of social media use, and what I advise people I work with is there really isn't that divide anymore. Things that you do in your personal life can be captured on social media and shared, even if you don't put it there. So I think we have to be prudent to make sure that, you know, we're using social media responsibly in both our professional and personal realms. I don't know, Michelle, what kind of institutional policies or sort of, do you have any blocks where you are?
No, we actually don't. So we've kind of been lucky that way that it has been fairly straightforward. So I'm glad you were able to share your experience, actually, because I couldn't really weigh in.
All right. Well, thanks for that. I mean, it's it is interesting that continues to be a challenge. But you know, it's funny because you talk about people using things like Facebook for like talking with old high school friends, etc. They never really seem to compare it to the current state or the state before social media was available. I mean, people could always use the telephone to make personal phone calls during work time. People are constantly, hospitals in particular, are constantly worried about privacy breaches, so people sending patient information by various web-based tools, whether it's social media or shared file services like Dropbox, etc. But we constantly have breaches in privacy with fax machines that they never really seem to consider. Is it better or worse than what's currently happening, people using telephones or fax machines inappropriately? So I always wonder if it's a problem, a potential risk and a potential problem with social media and other web-based tools, but that the risk is in fact less, and we're just not really realizing that. I'm not sure. But so the next question is from Katie, and she says, working at the CPS, which I believe would be the Canadian Pediatric Society, they're often trying to get their members, pediatricians, more comfortable with social media, but they are often apprehensive. And she's just asking, what would be your advice in working with pediatricians, or for the CPS in working with pediatricians? And I think it's important to say that most of their members would be sort of community-based primary care pediatricians that even CAFC has difficulty getting to. They're always a group that's really difficult to get to. We're well connected with sort of the hospital-based, multidisciplinary team, but those community-based pediatricians are a difficult group to get to just because they are so inundated with such a breadth of information. So what would be your advice to them in connecting with that specific group of largely community-based primary care pediatricians?
Michelle, did you want to start with that one?
I can give it a shot. Yeah, that is interesting just because, I mean, in general, clinicians, you're right, they are completely inundated, and it's a hard group to tap into, not necessarily because of lack of interest, but just, there are time constraints. So I guess my sense would just be that, you have to find what the value added is to them. So I think one of the things that we were trying to do with our journal clubs was have some kind of discrete, I guess not product, but just something that might pull people in. It might be of interest, and not necessarily to say that would work for every audience, but I guess it's just something, you need that draw first, and then maybe you can build more of a following or more engagement from there. Christine, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I was very skeptical about the value of social media when I first went to a few workshops on it, and I think I actually wrote in my evaluation form that I thought it would be a waste of time. So I think for me, there has been a huge value added, and I think sharing stories, I think that social media gets a lot of negative press, and I have to say, as someone who's been actively using it for the last 2 years, I've had like 99% positive experiences with people and content. So I think, providing opportunities, as CAFC has done for us today, to share some examples of how this can be a powerful tool. And also, I think, making it not be just something else they have to do. So, at the Canadian Pediatric Society, how can you engage input from your pediatricians, especially those in the community, that can be integrated into the organization, or that the organization ends up sharing, their stories. Maybe you profile, one of your, community pediatricians a week on your Facebook page, or, send out a tweet, about them to try to engage and build community in that way.
even just your research, Michelle, about putting, or your approach of putting sort of the types of information that they are looking for, like systematic reviews and that sort of thing on social media, they will eventually start to update it, because it's about, sort of like you said, it's getting the stuff that they're already comfortable with and then leveraging social media after that. So once they start realizing that that type of systematic review and that sort of research information is available on social media, maybe that will be what attracts them there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, Doug, that's a great suggestion. I mean, if CPS was going to send a tweet about, you know, the key finding and new papers that have been published in Children's Health, I mean, that saves a pediatrician hours of sifting through journals. I mean, I know that I really enjoy Twitter as a way to get like 140-character synopsis of a newly published paper, just like the ones I send out about the papers I read. So I do think Michelle hit the nail on the head, is, you know, what's the value added?
The next couple questions are specific to Michelle's presentations. Lisa's asking, what venues did they use for the paid advertising for recruitment in the research?
So our strategy, we had kind of worked with a marketing company, and we really focused on Facebook. And so we tried a couple of different strategies. We had kind of the traditional paid ads, the ones that you kind of see along the right-hand side of the screen. And then we also tried the promoted posts that appear right in the news feed. And as this was rolled out, we would kind of compare how they stacked up against one another, and then we'd kind of keep the more effective ones and let the other ones go. So what we found was that the ads that generated the most interest and received the most clicks were the ones that were right in the news feed, the promoted posts. However, the most popular ads that we had were more focused on prizes. So we were also holding a raffle for survey participants to enter a draw for a few different prizes, and so those were the ones that really got the interest, rather than the ones that were more focused on the intent of the study or wanting to engage parents.
Can I just add to that too, Michelle? I think what that really shows too, I mean, two things jump out at me. And again, looking at sort of how do others, you know, succeed in social media, prizes and incentives are used routinely as a way to motivate engagement on social media, you know, with content. And so, you know, that's not surprising. The other thing too is that if you're interested in using social media for a purpose, you know, like you want to recruit for a study, you have to put a lot of investment up front in building up a following and a presence long before you start recruiting. You know, if you just go onto Facebook to try to start recruiting participants, if you only have 7 people who like your page or 13 followers on Twitter, it's not going to be nearly as effective as investing in setting up a presence, or, you know, if you decide developing a relationship with your health center who's going to do it for you. So those are sort of two of my thoughts on this sort of recruitment piece.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's so important to have that buy-in before you start. And then it also goes back to going to where people are. So Christine, when you say, you know, getting your institution to, or kind of tapping into that existing network, I think that that's absolutely critical to get the most engagement that you can.
All right. The next question from Marnie was asking, again for Michelle, with the literature review that you were discussing, were there any negative outcomes experienced by children and youth involved in discussion forums that were generated for the purposes of mental health discussion that were moderated by the professionals? And was the lit review looking at social media use broadly?
Okay, so I'm assuming that that is about the reviews on, more specifically, the self-harm and cyberbullying reviews, or probably self-harm, I guess. We did have studies that were looking at professionally moderated discussion forums. However, they were cross-sectional. They were more describing how these youth were using the tools more than looking at any kind of health outcomes. So that was one of the things that we pulled out as being important for the future, is that, you know, we want to know if these can be used as interventions or if this can have sort of therapeutic benefit. So I think it will be really important to look at any kind of long-term impact and really tease out those health outcomes that do matter. So right now that's still a gap, but hopefully that's where research is starting to go.
Shannon's sort of making, I think, more of a comment than anything, but I'd love to hear your response on this. She says, as you talk about the parent team, she says many child life specialists in pediatrics run teen advisory boards as well. So, any comment about at least in your experience, who typically is running these kinds of advisory boards or discussion forums, or who should be leading them? Is it, it obviously shouldn't always be physicians, any, healthcare practitioners in general, parents, counselors, etc., teachers even. Do you have any experience with the breadth of people who are running these types of advisory boards, discussion forums, etc.?
I guess what we mostly saw was that it would be either a physician or a psychologist or someone that is their profession. However, something that was quite interesting was a theme that came out was that as these teenagers are using the forums, they kind of go through a shift where they're the ones who require support to the ones who provide support. So kind of that peer-to-peer interaction can also be quite beneficial. And, that might be a way that is more engaging for some of the people who are using the forums.
All right, our next question is from Melanie, and this one's, she says, a practical question for Dr. Chambers. She says, what kind of training would you suggest for other research teams interested in hosting events like the It Doesn't Have to Hurt launch?
Yeah, so I wish that there'd been a workshop I could have attended to prepare me for that. I think that, there are some great workshops and seminars that you can attend on social media, and I know that this webinar today is first in a series of 3 this year on social media. So I mentioned before that Eric and I are going to come in and present in January with some interim results on our It Doesn't Have to Hurt initiative. And there's another one planned for the spring, which is more of a how-to, like how to use social media. So I think if you ever see those opportunities, or you can ask your health center or organization if their communications people can offer you with that. With regard to our launch event for It Doesn't Have to Hurt, there wasn't really a recipe book for how to put that together, and it was really sort of integrating a lot of best practices and knowledge translation from a variety of different areas, not just social media, but also panel discussion and so on. So we're actually working on a paper and summarizing sort of our experiences with just the launch event. So we hope to have that available as a tool, because we appreciate that the methods that we're using are new, and it's not just the impact and evaluation data that people might be interested in, but also the story of how we're doing this so that others can use the strategies as well. So certainly feel free to email me and I can give you some more details, and we hope to have other resources available.
All right. Suzanne is asking, and this could be for either one of you, certainly would have some, I think, insight here. She says, working as a parent/patient advocate for a children's hospital in oncology, how do you create a more positive social media space for parents?
And Michelle, if you do you want me to jump in on that, or?
Sure, Christine, you can take that one.
Well, I think, that I have seen lots of patient advocates, parents in particular, I can think of about 10 or 12 at least who are really powerful on Twitter. I'm pleased to know Isabel Jordan, who is a parent who's engaged in our work from Squamish, BC. And I just love how these, patient advocates, parent advocates will insert themselves into Twitter chats that health professionals are leading, or healthcare leaders, often with a very humbling response. In terms of creating more opportunities for parents and patient advocates on social media, I think it's just a matter of reaching out to groups who are already facilitating that. There's Patient Chat, which is a great online community for patients. And I think also, reaching out directly to health researchers. And my fear is that, what I like about social media and Twitter is that it's an open community and anyone can be a member. So there aren't really subgroups of just patients chatting on social media and just parents, just health professionals. It's the total blurring of boundaries between patients, health professionals, reporters, organizations that I think is really exciting. And what I think is wonderful about Twitter in particular is that everyone's voice is equal. Everyone's tweet, everyone's 140 characters carries the same weight. So I think there are lots of opportunities there. Whether we could be more strategic about sort of how to facilitate that, I don't know. It would be interesting to consider that.
All right, here's another one I think that both of you might be able to respond to. The question is, have you had any negative or worrisome comments in your social media accounts, and how did you deal with that? And maybe we could sort of look at this more broadly as, like, I'm sure people have done everything from disagreed with you to maybe being even completely inappropriate as far as feedback or comments or responses on whether it's Twitter or social media accounts. Sort of wondering, whether it's you, Michelle, and sending out research that people have disagreed with, whether legitimately or not, because we all know that there are lots of interesting individuals out there in the social media world. What have your responses been, or can you give us some examples of how you've responded, whether it's to ignore, to engage, to what have you? Like some of your responses to the negative or worrisome comments that you've had, or if perhaps you haven't had any, but I would expect you've had something. But Michelle, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. So fortunately, we haven't had much of a negative response. I can only think of one instance where it wasn't even negativity, but it was probably, a bit of a troll kind of activity. So we would continually get responses from this account, mostly promoting inappropriate content and kind of latching onto our journal clubs and that sort of thing. The best that we could do was ignore it, not to engage with that kind of commentary. And I don't know, as far as I know, it dropped off. I know it dropped off on one account. I can't be sure about the other. But we just kind of waited it out and didn't engage with it at all.
Yeah, I'm shocked, given how much I use social media, and I'm just, embarrassed to look at how many tweets I've sent over the last 2 years, that I can think of 2 mildly negative interactions. One was someone, I had sent her my video, and she didn't appreciate me tagging her, and another sort of use of my hashtag, it doesn't have to hurt, in a way that I hadn't intended. And, the only thing you can do is not engage in those situations. You just simply don't share. You don't respond, because if you do, it just draws more attention to it. But it has really been shocking to me, given, when you read a CDC News article, for example, and you read the comments section, there's a lot of negativity there. But I don't see that happening. And I also have learned that social media has a wonderful kind of leveling and so if someone says something inappropriate, 5,000 people will tell them how wrong they are, and you don't have to say anything. And so, so I find it a little bit mind-blowing how little negative interactions I've had, how few relative to the overall, content.
All right. This is an interesting question, and I know it's from Lindsay is asking, and I know she's from a children's hospital south of the border in the United States, so I'm not sure how much we've seen of this in Canada, but she's saying, I was wondering if you could shed some light on the ethics behind families of patients waiting for organ transplants using social media as a platform to potentially identify a donor and get organs for their son or daughter. Are you aware of this happening in Canada? And if you are you aware of this happening at all? And you have any thoughts? Christine, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I certainly have heard and seen stories, of people using social media as a way to advocate for themselves, whether it's organ donation or whether it's, promoting crowdsourcing or, crowdfunding, to support families who, have needs. To be honest, it's not something I've really given a lot of thought to around, the ethics of that and what sort of regulations or, policies are in place. I think this is something, that is going to be needed, to give attention to. You can't stop anyone from using social media the way they want to use it, especially in their personal life. So I think we need to think very carefully around how we want to react to those types of things.
And Michelle, any thoughts on that one?
I think I'm kind of in the same boat. I've heard these stories, but again, I'm not really familiar with anything firsthand or any kind of policies. So, yeah, I agree with Christine's take on it, though.
All right. Well, we are at 12:30, which is when we're supposed to end. I do have one more question here that we'll get a response to, if possible, and then maybe some closing comments from our presenters after that, and then we'll close this session off. But the last question from Tricia is saying, we are proposing using a live Twitter feed during a conference for child and youth service providers as an innovative approach. Do you have any experience using Twitter as a platform to share live updates and invite audience participation during a live conference? And if so, can you offer any suggestions or advice?
Yeah, I think that sort of relates to the other question around, how we use social media for our launch event. And we are, right now we've had an amazing live tweeting engagement during the webinar. My biggest advice for people who are planning on having a live tweeting component at a meeting is to not just expect it to happen. You've got to plan your hashtag carefully, make sure people know about it in advance. And you also want to have, people on what I would even call a Twitter team who have committed in advance to sharing content. Because the last thing you want to do is give it all a lot of hype and then nobody posts anything. So I think, sometimes what happens on social media looks very organic, but often it is scheduled or planned in a pretty systematic way.
Yeah, and I agree with Christine. The planning definitely helps. You probably have to do more than you think you do. But in my experience, it's pretty popular at these conferences. So if you do have that hashtag and you put in the effort to promote it in advance, it seems like people do like it. And hopefully there is a big enough group that can kind of get it going. And when you see it on a big screen beside the stage, it kind of encourages other people to participate if they can as well.
Yeah, I think Michelle's right. These things start to take on a life of their own. And, like today, for example, during this, we planned out some tweets. But then there was great engagement from people using the CAFC Presents hashtag, and it sort of took off on its own. So I think it's a mix of, planning and also allowing for some spontaneity.
Yeah, and we have done, like you said, we did it during this session, and it can get difficult to keep track of it while you're participating in the conversation and to keep track of the Twitter. We've also used it at our conference, and I think one of the things that we learned is you have to have some people sort of there to drive to help drive the conversation, because it's one of those things where people don't. If it's during a conference, a lot of times people won't participate until someone else is. So if you have those people set up in advance, prepared to help sort of lead the conversation on Twitter, as well as a good facilitator of the session to help make sure that those comments on Twitter aren't just, that you don't have two separate conversations, that they're actually bringing the live or the Twitter conversation into the live conversation. If you don't bring that in, then I think it doesn't work well. If you leave them to sort of live on their own separately, you have to have someone that can facilitate the melding of the two conversations, and you have to have someone in front of that computer that's prepared to help lead the conversation and initiate and engage and that sort of thing. It doesn't just happen on its own. I do know that much.
Right. Very true.
So what I haven't heard from you, Christine, is any ways to guarantee that you can get 6 million engagements during this event, though.
Yeah, there's no promise, there's no guarantee.
But I think that's certainly the lesson that I've learned is and in watching your experience. I mean, it's really been incredible as CAFC being a partner in that. It really was amazing, but it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't happen organically. There's a lot of work that goes into establishing an audience and getting the partners like the Yummy Mummy Club, like Andre Picard, who have those big networks. And it's really about developing a network that can leverage other networks and use that sort of exponential sort of propagation that social media allows you to do. It doesn't happen that single. You make it sound simple when you say the power of a single tweet, but there's so much more going on than just simply getting a Twitter account and posting a single tweet and expecting magic to happen. There's a lot of work that goes into it.
Yeah, that's a really important part. And I think that's what I like about social media is it relies on all of us to support each other to help reach our goals. In this case, promoting and supporting child health and child health research.
All right, well, I think that's our cue to wrap up. We don't have any more questions, so maybe some closing comments, Michelle. Maybe we can start with you. Anything you want to leave the audience with, final messages?
I think that like social media is such a fascinating area, and on both sides you can kind of get caught up in what might be harmful, what might be beneficial, but it's a balance, and so there's really a lot of potential there. And I think we can continue to do more really high quality research to see what really does work and how can we best use these kinds of platforms to engage with our audience and kind of to be involved in the healthcare setting.
And Christine, from you, anything to close off with?
No, I think appreciating that there are both successes and challenges here to this work, and being, I guess, encouraging people to think in a different way and not to create more work for themselves, but to look to people who can help you reach your goal in an innovative and different way.
All right, and I think with that we will close off. And as I saw mentioned on the Twitter stream, this is part one of I guess we'll call it a series. We've got three webinars on social media that we are planning to present. We're coming back in January with Christine and her team to talk specifically about their Doesn't Have to Hurt project and some of the research they're doing. And then we're coming back following that with our colleagues again, Dr. Chambers, and as well as our colleagues from CHEO Research Institute and CHEO Hospital and some other people to talk specifically. We're calling it sort of a how-to in social media, so to give people some real practical, hands-on examples and experiences of what hospitals are doing to use social media to disseminate information, to engage a community, et cetera, et cetera. So keep your eyes peeled for those webinars coming up. Both of those, part 2 and 3, in the new year in January and February. I think we have them scheduled, but information to follow. So thanks to our audience.
Elaine, I just want to say a shout out, a big thank you to both Christine and Michelle. What a fantastic webinar. Thank you so very much.
Thanks, Elaine.
All right, well, thanks everyone, and we do our webinars every Wednesday at 11, and I do see lots of people saying hope to see you next time, so we do certainly hope to see you next time. We do try to do them every week. We don't always get every week, but we try to do them every week, and they're always at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on Wednesdays, and it's always great if you can watch live, as your questions and comments really enrich the discussion. But if you can't watch live, as I mentioned, the recordings of these sessions are made available after the fact on the CAPSI Knowledge Exchange Network at www.ken.cafsi.org. Next week, on November 11th, Remembrance Day, we will be starting at 11:05 in order to allow everyone to observe a moment of silence to recognize the contributions of our veterans and to honor those who have lost their lives in military service on behalf of Canada. But we will start a few minutes late, and we'll be hearing from our nursing network colleagues with a presentation on sleep disturbance in children and their families across the continuum of care. And we'll be hearing from a team from Sick Kids, the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, about some of the latest research in the area of sleep and its impact on the health of children and families. And on November 25th, we will hear from our colleagues at the Healthy Active Living and Obesity Research Group, known as the HALO Research Group at the CHEO Research Institute. That's the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario Research Institute in Ottawa. And they're going to talk to us about looking beyond inactivity and unhealthy diet. How should we address obesity in 2015? So it's going to be a really interesting sort of overview of the obesity epidemic, I guess people are still calling it, in pediatric obesity, and how we should maybe think differently about obesity in order to address it in modern times. So some great stuff coming up in the next few weeks. So thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you back here next week. Bye, everyone.